as your eyes grow heavy and the world softens around you. Imagine drifting into the tranquil hush of a medieval library. Tonight's tale is drawn from Medieval Lives by Norman Cantor, a gentle journey into the quiet moments between wars, not the battles themselves. Softly, we breathe in history and let it help us breathe out into sleep. The quiet scriptorium in the candlelit hush. Monks scribe illuminated manuscripts. The scent of aging parchment, the scratch of quill. Their days were simple, copying psalms, prayers, chronicles. Most medieval literacy was focused on devotion, not glory. Feel the rhythm of the quill tracing letters. Hearthside tales when daylight faded. Families gathered around hearths in timber homes. Stories weren't epic sagas, they were about the barley harvest, the meeting by the well. Domestic stories soothed more than enthralled. Imagine flames dancing in the quiet room, the warmth lulling you. Cloistered night gardens beneath the moonlight. Medieval abbeys sheltered quiet gardens. Monks believed that stillness under stars brought them closer to the divine. Monks often ended their day walking in silence, the sound of their sandals brushing gravel. Picture yourself there, the garden still, the air cool, and your breath falling into rhythm with the calm night. A candle in the watchtower. Not every night was entirely safe. In castles, a watchman's duty was to pace the ramparts by torchlight. But even this was often quiet, uneventful, almost meditative. Hours might pass with only the sound of owls, the distant stream, or the soft rattle of armor as the guard leaned against the stone. Imagine the steady rhythm of his footsteps, and let your own mind find that pace. The village sleeps down in the valley. Small villages lay in darkness. Roofs of thatch glistened with dew. In the ties that bound 1986, sunrise meant work, sundown meant rest. After supper, families huddled together on straw pallets, lulled by the rhythm of livestock shifting in barns. Even their dreams, recorded in medieval dream books, were often about bread, fields, and weather. Let your breathing slow as theirs did, centuries ago. The Abbey Bell monasteries rang bells, even in the night. At matins around 2:00 or 3:00 a.m., monks rose for prayer. The sound was deep, resonant, but strangely calming. Imagine yourself drifting, hearing the bell not as an alarm, but as a gentle call into timelessness, a reminder that night was not lonely, but shared. The sound rolls outward, fades, then melts into silence again. A pilgrim's rest across Europe. Pilgrims walked long, dusty roads to holy sites. At night, they rested in hostels or barns, often sharing bread with strangers. These nights weren't grand, just tired bodies lying shoulder to shoulder, watching smoke curl toward rafters. Yet even here, there was peace. The kind of peace that comes from exhaustion, safety, and hope. As your body sinks into stillness, imagine yourself among them, drifting into sleep on a straw bed, heart unburdened. The glow of the inn along medieval roads. Inns offered weary travelers a simple haven. Candles guttered in iron holders, ale was poured into rough mugs, and straw mattresses filled narrow rooms. These spaces were noisy by day, but softened into quiet hums at night. The murmur of distant laughter, the clink of mugs settling, then a gradual hush as guests fell asleep. Let that hush become your own. Candlemakers' shop candles lit nearly every medieval night. Beeswax candles were prized by the wealthy for their sweet scent and clean flame, while tallow candles made of animal fat flickered in common homes. The glow of a single candle transformed entire rooms, shifting shadows like gentle waves. Picture the flames dance steady, warm, reassuring. Night on the sea. Merchants and sailors often traveled by night. On calm seas, the stars were brighter than anywhere on land. Wrote of sailors steering by constellations while listening to the creak of rigging. Imagine the sway of a wooden ship, waves whispering against its sides, the cool breath of night air across your skin. Shepherds under stars away from towns. Shepherds watched flocks under endless skies. Their crooks rested at their sides. Dogs lay curled at their feet. Nights outdoors meant long hours of stillness broken only by bleats and distant howls. Yet shepherds often sang softly to pass the time. Hear that low melody, half lullaby, half prayer floating into the night. The cathedral at dusk in towns. Cathedrals rose high above rooftops, their spires catching the last light. By night, the streets emptied, but the stones held warmth. Cathedrals weren't only for worship, they shaped the city's rhythm. At night, their silence itself became part of life, a dark outline reminding all of eternity. Imagine yourself resting under that shadow, safe and small within its vast embrace. The market after hours by day, medieval markets were chaos. Shouting vendors, animals, spices, fabrics. But after dark, stalls were empty, baskets overturned, only the faint smell of bread and herbs left behind. In medieval markets and fairs, he describes the quiet contrast of nighttime marketplaces as a pause between storms. Walk with me there. Quiet cobblestones, faint moonlight on empty benches, echoes fading into stillness. The Nile beneath the stars in ancient Egypt. Night along the Nile was filled with quiet waters and brilliant skies. Farmers, having ended their day's labor, would sit by reed huts and listen to the hum of crickets. The river at night symbolized renewal, its calm surface mirroring the heavens. Imagine the slow drift of a papyrus boat, lanterns flickering, the current carrying you gently onward. A Roman villa at dusk in the Roman Empire. Country villas quieted when laborers returned from fields. Describes evenings spent listening to fountains and distant lyres. Courtyards glowed with oil lamps, while families reclined, discussing philosophy or simply letting silence settle. Breathe in the stillness. The marble cool, the night scented with olive groves. Caravanserai on the Silk Road. Merchants traveling the Silk Road often stopped at caravanserai's stone inns built along desert routes. At night, camels rested within courtyards, while traders unrolled carpets under the stars. These spaces became cultural crossroads, where languages mixed in low voices before sleep. Imagine the desert breeze, the smell of spice sacks, and the soft thrum of distant drums fading into silence. The Mughal palace by moonlight in Mughal India. Emperors often enjoyed moonlit gardens. Wrote of walking among fountains and perfumed flowers at night, soothed by musicians playing sitar and bansuri. Imagine the marble steps wet with dew, night jasmine drifting in the air, and the gentle pluck of strings echoing into the darkness. The Ottoman caravan, Knights Ottoman traders, moving across Anatolia, camped at roadside hands. At night, fires flickered in courtyards as travelers shared coffee and poetry. These stops gave strangers a brief family, warmth, song, and protection through the dark. Picture the stars over tiled domes, the sound of horses shifting, and voices slowly fading to rest. The Japanese Zen monastery in medieval Japan. Zen monks ended their day with zazen-seated meditation before sleep. In Zen Buddhism, descriptions of monasteries at night emphasize the rustle of bamboo, the distant drip of water basins, and the calm rhythm of breath. Imagine kneeling on tatami mats, lantern light swaying, the garden beyond holding its silence. Viking longhouse in the north, far in Scandinavia. Viking families gathered in longhouses built of timber and sod. By firelight, smoke curled up through the roof hole as people lay on benches covered with furs. Sagas tell us that evenings were filled with low voices, storytelling, and sometimes soft harp music. Outside, the wind howled, but inside there was warmth, children listening until their eyes closed. The flicker of flames, the last thing they saw. Andean highlands, Inca night high in the Andes. Inca farmers ended their day watching constellations above terraces of maize. Explains that the Inca read the stars not as patterns of light, but of dark spaces, constellations made of shadows in the Milky Way. Nights were filled with the sounds of wind in the mountains, llamas shifting softly, and families huddled in stone homes. Imagine the mountain silence, thin air cooling your breath, stars deep and endless above. Native American campfire across the plains of North America. Tribes gathered around fires for evening storytelling. Stories weren't merely entertainment, they carried wisdom and identity. The fire crackled, sparks rose, drums beat softly, and voices told of the coyote, the eagle, and the winds. Imagine that gentle circle, flames warming your face, stories flowing into the night air like lullabies. West African kingdoms in the courts of Mali and Ghana. Griot's oral historians sang at night to kings and villagers alike. Describes their kora instruments, strings plucked like soft rain. Their songs carried genealogies, memories, prayers. Picture sitting under a baobab tree, stars spread wide, listening to a voice weaving centuries into calm. Each note is like a heartbeat slowing, guiding you into dreams. Chinese scholars' courtyard in Ming-era China. Scholars often ended evenings writing poetry by moonlight. Moonlit nights inspired countless verses about solitude, rivers, and quiet friendship. One famous poem by Zhang Jai Tang Dynasty describes, "Moon sets, crows cry, frost fills the sky, riverside maples, fishermen's lights." Imagine sitting in a stone courtyard, brush in hand, lantern swaying, crickets filling the silence. Desert nomads beneath the sky for Bedouin nomads. Nights in the desert were vast and eternal. Families gathered in tents, drinking coffee and reciting poetry while camels rested nearby. The desert wind hummed low. Stars stretched across the horizon like a woven carpet. Imagine lying back on warm sand, hearing verses rise and fall like waves, your own breath finding rhythm in the desert night. Renaissance Italy, candlelit studio in Florence. As the Renaissance bloomed, artists worked by candlelight long after the streets grew quiet. Describes how painters and sculptors like Leonardo and Michelangelo often found their calmest hours at night, when silence sharpened focus. Imagine brushes dipping into pigment, sketches forming by lamplight, and the city beyond lying still. Your own breathing falls into that rhythm's slow strokes, soft silence. A Venetian canal under moonlight in Venice. Nights shimmered across canals, gondolas gliding under starlight. As chronicled, quiet nighttime rides were spaces of reflection, where the sound of water lapping against stone lulled passengers into thought. Picture lanterns swaying gently, reflections trembling, and the whole city whispering softly like a cradle song. A monastery library in Spain. Spain's great monastic libraries were sanctuaries of knowledge. At night, monks trace their fingers over illuminated texts before rest. Notes that these spaces carried silence not as emptiness, but as presence. Imagine rows of manuscripts glowing by candlelight, leather bindings, and dust motes drifting slowly in warm air. The library's hush wraps around you, steady and deep. Ottoman Istanbul at night in Istanbul. Minarets rose against moonlight, and the call to prayer echoed even into the late hours. Rites of coffee houses, where poets, musicians, and travelers gathered at night to share stories. Picture narrow streets winding toward the Bosphorus, lanterns hung from arches, and voices soft as the sea's tide. Each sip of coffee, each note of song, guided minds toward rest. A French salon, Enlightenment evenings in 18th century Paris. Salons hosted gatherings where philosophers debated under chandeliers. Nights stretched long as ideas bloomed like flowers. Yet outside the chatter, there was a gentler scene. Carriages rolling softly over cobblestones, candles flickering low, a sense of cities turning slowly toward rest. Imagine closing your eyes as voices fade, leaving only warmth and the promise of tomorrow's dawn. Industrial England, night in the mill town as the 19th century unfolded. Factories lit the night with smoke and fire. Yet when the last whistle blew, silence fell quickly. Children falling asleep on straw mattresses, still smelling faintly of soot. Imagine the dim glow of coal stoves, the hush of exhausted bodies, the streets emptying into stillness. Even amid industry, night offered its tender reprieve. A railway journey by night, trains changed the rhythm of sleep. In 1830, Britain, passengers reclined in dim carriages as iron wheels hummed across tracks. Describes night trains as dreamlike machines, where flickering lamps swayed with the motion. Imagine the steady rhythm of wheels, the darkness beyond the window, and your body sinking as if rocked in a cradle. Colonial port by lantern light across the world's harbors, ships anchored under lantern glow. In Calcutta, Cape Town, or Havana, Sailors unloaded cargo before resting in hammocks. The sea left men exhausted, and ports became spaces of brief comfort food, ale, and sleep. Picture a dockside tavern fading into silence, waves lapping against hulls, lanterns flickering on wet timbers. Rural Europe, candlelit farmhouse, not all nights were touched by industry. In the countryside, families still gathered around hearths much as they had for centuries. Rites of peasants' evenings filled with bread, cheese, and soft talk before bed. Imagine wooden beams overhead, a small candle lighting the table, and the rhythmic sound of wind outside. The day ends, but peace stretches long. African savannah village at night in rural East Africa. Evenings pulsed with drums and then softened into silence. Describes how nightfall gathered communities together, songs at first lively, then fading into quiet prayers. Imagine the moon high above acacia trees, fire dying low, and people lying on mats beneath the stars. Their voices slow, hearts calm, the night endless and kind. In London, evenings often began with heavy curtains drawn, oil lamps lit, and parlors filled with quiet chatter. It notes how the middle class surrounded themselves with books, pianos, and polished furniture. Yet, as the lamps dimmed and clocks ticked softly, households eased into silence. Imagine teacups stacked away, a piano lid closing gently, and the world shrinking to the glow of one lamp. Ottoman coffee houses by night across Istanbul, Damascus, and Cairo. Coffee houses glowed with lamplight. Men gathered to smoke nargile, sip dark coffee, and listen to storytellers before drifting home. The air thick with spice and smoke, the stories spun like dreams. Imagine the final embers fading, chairs stacked, and the streets of the old cities falling into stillness beneath minarets. Japanese Meiji-era streets at night in Tokyo after 1868. Lanterns lined narrow streets, blending tradition with new Western lamps. The city buzzed with tea houses, kabuki theaters, and small shops. But even in this energy, there were pauses, temple bells ringing, shutters closing, and lanterns one by one snuffed out. Imagine tiled roofs, glistening with rain, as silence spread across the sleeping city. Russian countryside, winter night in the Russian steppe. Night could be fierce, but also deeply still. Peasants gathering under thick furs around ovens that heated entire homes. Songs, Orthodox prayers, and candlelight filled the darkness. Imagine snow drifting outside, logs cracking in the stove, and every voice softening into whispers before rest. Native Alaskan winter nights in Arctic villages. Night stretched for months. Long evenings were filled with drum dances and storytelling. Children fell asleep to the rhythm of drums and tales of spirits and hunters. Imagine a circle of firelight within endless snow, stars shimmering above, and the hush of the northern world embracing you. The first electric nights by the early 1900s, cities glowed with a new brilliance. Electric light. In New York, Paris, and Berlin, streets shimmered under lamps that never flickered. Explains how electricity transformed evening into a realm of industry and leisure. Imagine the hum of wires, the glow of bulbs, and people staring upward in wonder at nights that were no longer truly dark. Cinema halls in the 1910 darkened theaters became temples of night. Film reels clicked, projectors hummed, and faces shone with silver light. Silent movies gave audiences dreams with flickering images. Imagine velvet seats, cigarette smoke rising, and the hush of a crowd lost in shadow and story. Outside, the world was silent. Inside, night itself was enchanted. Jazz clubs and Harlem nights by the 1920s. The night was filled with rhythm. In Harlem, New Orleans, and Chicago, jazz floated out of smoky clubs. Nights pulsed with trumpets, drums, and syncopated beats. But within that energy was intimacy. Soft lamps, slow dances, and voices whispering over the music. Imagine neon signs outside, music drifting into the streets, and the hum of life that carried people until dawn. The night of the trenches. WWI war brought another kind of night. In muddy trenches of France, soldiers lay awake beneath distant artillery fire. describes how silence was broken by shells and darkness pierced by flares. Imagine the cold, the damp, and men whispering prayers before drifting into uneasy sleep. The night, once a place of comfort, had become heavy with fear. Street lamps and urban comfort, even as war raged. Cities continued to adapt to their new light. Paris was called La Ville Lumière, the city of light, not just for its ideas but for its glowing boulevards. Electric street lamps offered safety, and families strolled at dusk as if night had softened. Imagine cafes glowing with warm windows, lovers sitting at round tables, and carriages replaced by early cars gliding through lamplit streets. The night of the Great Depression, the 1930s, brought quiet streets. In America and beyond, the Great Depression dimmed the hum of cities. Factories went silent, and nights grew longer in homes where families gathered by candle or cheap electric lamps. The silence of unemployment was heavy. Picture families seated together, reading aloud, sewing, or simply sitting in stillness night as a place of shared endurance. The radio glow in those same years. The radio became the hearth of the night. Notes how families leaned toward wooden radios, listening to jazz, baseball, and fireside chats. Imagine the crackle of static, voices echoing softly, and the way the warm orange dial lit up a dark room. The radio made night less lonely, turning silence into connection. Blackouts and war preparations by the late 1930s. Storm clouds gathered. In Europe, war preparations reshaped nights. Cities practiced blackouts covering windows, turning off lamps, dimming streets. Recounts how Londoners learned to live with enforced darkness, stars suddenly visible over a silent city, picture cloth draped over windows, dim lanterns indoors, and neighbors whispering while scanning the skies. The Blitz at night World War II turned night into terror. In London, Berlin, and Warsaw, bombers filled the skies. Nights were pierced by sirens, searchlights, and falling bombs. Imagine families huddled in shelters, the ground shaking, children clutching dolls while above, fiery streaks lit the dark. Sleep came only in fragments, broken by fear. Soldiers' nights on the front far from the cities, soldiers endured nights in the field. Letters from WW2 reveal men writing by candlelight, longing for home. Imagine a soldier sitting in mud or snow, pen in hand, whispering prayers under the stars. In such moments, the night was not enemy nor friend, only a witness to human hope, darkness. Music persisted. In America, swing bands filled dance halls, offering escape from rationing and worry. Evenings resounded with trumpets and saxophones. Imagine soldiers on leave, dancing with sweethearts, forgetting the world for a few hours. Music was a defiance against the heavy silence of war. The return of peaceful nights with the war over in 1945. Cities lit up again. No more blackout curtains, no more air raid sirens.